Hi, I'm Dr. David Dobson. Welcome to Conversations. Today, my guest is Dr. Kent Williams. Kent is an assistant professor in climate change and impact leadership at FC Manning School of Business, Acadia University. He received his Doctoral of Social Science degree from Royal Road University, where he explored an emerging dialogue between nature and leaders for leadership development. Today, we will discuss his doctoral work. It's a pleasure to have you on my show, Kent.
David, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to our dialogue together.
Your doctoral work focused on knowing ourselves in leadership. Can you share a little bit about your work?
Yeah, absolutely. I've always been interested in the leadership form and what this idea of leadership is and why it's important. And so as I, did my graduate work, I got more, you dive into, you get on the shoulders of these giants and, you're reading all this literature. And yeah, the more I got into it, I really realized that leadership is this never-ending story, right? That it's a pathway you take and that it's really constructed through the lived experience. So that's what really enabled me to go down this road of, you know, what enables us to have capacity and capability to lead. And it's a funny thing, when I originally was started my doctorate, I was interested in this whole area of neuro leadership. David Rock and others do this work, and but the more and more I explored this topic and I got more connected with my values and my own lived experience around leadership, I realized that I really want to study this idea of how does nature really facilitate learning. I had the opportunity to connect with David Milton, who's a elder. I would call him an elder out of the U.S. and has led people like Peter Senge and Sharma and many others on nature retreats. And I had the opportunity to go down to the U.S. and work with him in that nature setting. And it really connected to kind of my upbringing and background and just really enabled deeper meaning making. And then I just really knew I needed to study this type of form, the nature retreat, and how does nature act as a facilitator of learning. So this is how I kind of stumbled, and I think it was really just was meant to be, right? Study this area of leadership. And it's one that I continue to try to gain meaning making around.
Very nice. Before we go deep into your topic, can you explain a little bit what particularly attracted you to leadership?
Well, I think that what attracted me to leadership, that's a good question. I think what attracted me to leadership is it's such an important element and process in organizational community life, right? To be able to take on the challenges of our world and move forward in a positive way. I think I really look at leadership as what you call space between, right? We have many different meanings. David Roast from California, the emeritus professor, he explored leadership, and when he studied, he found over 200 meanings, definitions of leadership. And I think it's one that's spoken about often,
Yeah.
rarely understood.
Yeah.
So I think it's really trying to understand what leadership is what attracted me to it, and what can enable what we call leadership to really influence the systems that we live in, to create positive change.
Nice. The focus of your thesis was knowing ourselves. So why that is important for being a leader?
Aristotle, you go back to the ancient Greeks, right? And you go to the one of the maxims that they had was know thyself. It's one of the three main maxims they had. If you go to the temple, the Delphi temple, and I think that still holds for today. Is leadership is all about knowing thyself, to really truly understand your own true nature and how to show up authentically and interact with people. And so when I talk to my students all the time, I tell them how important it is to be reflective, to really get to know thyself. And I really, it's value-based, and being really knowing what your purpose is will really enable you to be able to lead effectively.
Nice. So I want to go back to your doctoral work. In your study, you explored the lived experience of leaders at a nature retreat. Can you share the setup of your study?
Yeah, it's again, I had the opportunity I did a pilot study.
Mhm.
I'll even go back a little further. I was reading this one book, and I recommend it to your viewers.
Okay.
Presence by Peter Senge,
Okay.
um, Flowers, Sharma, and Jaworski. And in that book, Jaworski shares a nature experience where he's down in Baja, Mexico,
Okay.
where he's done this solo out of nature for a week,
Mm.
and he experienced this profound connection with the self and nature, and really tells it from a leadership narrative. Uh, John Milton comes up in the book as the one that led them through this nature retreat. And shortly after that, it was really profound when I read it. I was like,
Yeah.
I need to meet this John Milton.
Okay.
And within a year, I was down in Baja, Mexico, doing a nature retreat where I did a solo on a beach for a week
Mm.
with the bare essentials and just really with
Wow.
myself. And John calls it all one time, but I was not by myself, right? I was connected to
Mm.
myself in
Yeah.
nature, and I
Yeah.
experienced
Yeah.
200 whale sightings.
Oh, wow.
I'd see the skates in the waves, the
Mm.
birds in the morning going out for
Mm.
work and then coming back, the
Yeah.
crabs crawling up these um, rock walls like
Yeah.
nobody's business. And
Yeah.
you just really, it was a profound experience. And I think
Mm.
that where the idea started bubbling around what I wanted to do. And then to make a long story short, I had an opportunity to do a pilot study with John Milton in 2014, where I was trying to formulate how do I want to go about studying this. Initially thought I'd parachute into a bunch of nature retreats that through this network and get the lived experience there.
Yeah.
But then I talked to John, and he
Mm.
was willing to come up
Mm.
if I was to build a nature retreat. And so I went about building the nature retreat. And why the lived experience? Just reading a lot about phenomenology really intrigued me because it's about going deep and discursive. It's not
Mm.
about cause and effect. It's really trying to get meaning making behind the experience and to get that deep discursive meaning of what the nature retreat was all about. And so that's the narrative that I wanted to share. And from that, you can get nodes that can kind of give hints of what this might mean to
Yeah.
leadership development.
Yeah.
And so that's what I did. I did a call out for phenomenology. You don't need a large number.
Yeah.
The research methodology says like six
Yeah.
to eight, but for some reason I felt like I want to
Yeah.
get around 15. And I thought that would be the most challenging thing. How do I get a group of
Yeah.
senior leaders to Nova
Yeah.
Scotia, remote Nova Scotia, actually an island called
Yeah.
Little Dover?
Yeah.
How do I get them there
Yeah.
uh, and get the numbers? Well, when I put my call out through my network,
Yeah.
LinkedIn, and so forth,
Yeah.
when I did the participant call, I had over 30 participants from 5 different countries.
Okay.
And it was amazing. And I had to actually form a committee to narrow down, and I ended up choosing 15 based on this criteria that I set
Mm.
up. And I thought in the end I'd have a few dropouts, and sure enough, I
Mhm.
did. And I got the exact number I wanted: 12,
Okay.
12 senior leaders, 5 women, 7 men from Netherlands, UK, and Canada. And yeah, it was a really wonderful experience bringing them together.
Nice.
But that's how I kind of formed the methodology and um, who I wanted to bring and so forth.
I just want to go back to the nature. I mean, why nature is so important for us, for human, to be
Well,
connected with the nature.
yeah. Well, we are of nature. If you really understand and connect deeply with nature,
Yeah.
and reflectively think about it, we are of nature. You look at our hands, they're made
Yeah.
up. If you believe in scientific truth,
Yeah.
we're born out of the Big Bang.
Yeah.
We're dust, right? And
Yeah.
our molecules are always turning over, and we are of and you understand the universal story,
Mm-hmm.
and Schwinn and Tucker tell it beautifully in their work, that we are of nature. And I think and it's just in modern times, really over the last 500 years, we've really disconnected.
Mm.
We've culturally come embedded and we've put nature as something outside of us. And I think this
Mm.
has created many of the challenges that we
Yeah.
face today, where we have a one-way relationship with nature. We're very
Yeah.
good at exploiting
Yeah.
nature and extracting. We're extracting society. And
Mm.
you look at the shape we're in now, I think there's
Mm.
no doubt that scientific truth with
Mm.
climate change,
Yeah.
loss of biodiversity,
Yeah.
inequality, food insecurity,
Yeah.
the list goes on. And if you
Yeah.
listen to the news every day, we
Yeah.
hear this alarm going off.
Yeah.
Maybe a lot of us are numb to it, aren't listening.
Yeah.
But I think if there's an opportunity, a
Mm-hmm.
slim opportunity, if we can really reconnect with nature,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
go back to the organic ways, and the
Mm.
indigenous
Mm.
community still holds on to that. They can be
Mm.
exemplars for us,
Mm-hmm. Mm.
um, for how to understand that there's this interdependent relationship, that there's this reciprocal relationship, and that we need to have a two-way relationship with nature. And we need to move beyond just sustainability, and how do
Mm.
we move towards restoration and
Mm.
regeneration. And I think that that's where all our effort has to be. And
Mm.
in our business schools, that's what we need to
Mm.
be teaching, and moving away from traditional, this
Mm.
idea of myth on profit
Mm.
maximization,
Mm.
and this idea of extraction and
Mm.
exploitation has
Mm.
got to end, else we're not going to have a future. The
Yeah.
planet will move on. We often say we need to save the planet,
Yeah.
but I laugh when I hear that, and I hear my father echoing in me, who would always tell me that the planet's going to be fine. It's human development, and I think that maybe from an
Yeah.
egotistical, ego-centered way, we might
Yeah.
wake up more to the idea, if we have a
Yeah.
selfish
Yeah.
preservation, we want to save ourselves. Maybe we'll react better and more responsibly on the planet.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think nature plays such an important role.
Mm.
And I'm happy to tell you more
Mm.
about,
Sure.
my studies and what I've found, just even
Yeah.
working with students, that
Mm.
nature really is a teacher. It really
Mm.
facilitates, it
Mm.
provides a space for
Mm.
deep learning and that connection to self
Mm.
that leadership needs, right? To
Yeah.
truly
Yeah.
do leadership.
Yeah. Yeah. So can we go back to your experiment or your experience of leaders at the Nature Center? Uh, what did you learn from this study?
Yeah, well, it's kind of what, reading the literature beforehand and just my own lived experience. I felt that, yeah, going into nature would really kind of, allow for this, what I call the relational turn, and some good readings as well for your audience. If you
Mm-hmm.
look West et al. On
Mm-hmm.
the relational turn, I think 2020 talks about this idea of relational turn, and it's
Mm-hmm.
moving away from, even, we talk a lot about systems thinking.
Yeah.
Well, nature provides this relational turn. And so I kind of thought that taking people into nature, having that deep experience, would provide this, what I call even like cracking open oneself, right?
Yeah.
That, again, culture holds us and even limits us in how we're supposed to act. And this connects to this idea of constructive developmental theory, right? That
Mm-hmm.
through the lived experience, we kind of come in this cycle of embeddedness,
Mm-hmm.
differentiation, new regulation,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a whole ongoing process, from embeddedness to differentiation. Well, I feel like when we have the opportunity to go into nature, we have that cultural embeds us in this way of knowing. But when we get out into nature, I think it cracks it open, and it sheds. That's kind of what I explained in my study, and what I saw from my participants that came from all kinds of walks of life.
Mm-hmm.
But I saw a real shedding of cultural embeddedness,
Mm-hmm.
and really allowed for that true authentic self to come out. And
Mm-hmm.
I think this is how we learn best, is when we can move outside of those cultural norms that hold us
Mm-hmm.
and start to see the world differently.
Yeah.
And it's that relational turn. We kind of turn from that cultural way of knowing the world to a relational way of knowing the world. So when you're out there,
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've ever experienced
Mm.
a long time in nature, but even I can tell you from my own experience when I did
Yeah.
the 7-day retreat on the beach where it was just myself and a little
Yeah.
bit of food and no
Mm.
technology,
Mm.
and you're alone with yourself.
Yeah.
It's it takes a bit of getting used to
Yeah.
because we're so used, and especially the world we live in today with so
Yeah.
much technology,
Yeah.
everything's fast paced, right?
Yeah.
And you have you got to get that text and that
Yeah.
email and the phone
Yeah.
call. And
Mm.
but when you move away from that,
Mm.
nature provides this space
Mm.
of really
Yeah.
connecting inward to ourselves. And for
Yeah.
some people, it's really hard because
Mm.
they don't want to know,
Yeah.
they don't want to connect to that because they don't know that person.
Yeah.
But what happens is when the cultural shedding gets away,
Yeah.
it does cause moments of, because that voice, you're alone with yourself in
Yeah.
nature, but
Yeah.
things start to unfold.
Yeah.
And it can be very challenging and this is what I found with some of my
Mm.
participants. There was
Mm.
different levels of degree depending on what you'd call awareness
Mm.
to the world and to nature.
Mm.
For some people that
Mm.
were have not done
Yeah.
a lot of awareness training, it caused
Yeah.
friction. It's those mental models, right? You have those
Yeah.
old mental models
Yeah.
are rubbing up against new
Yeah.
forming mental models.
Yeah.
And you start to discover that self,
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
thyself,
Yeah.
and you connect to what really matters to you in life.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
uh, and you connect to nature and you see that you
Yeah.
are every bit a part of it. When I had
Yeah.
those moments, and I'll just tell you,
Yeah.
when I deeply connected to the creatures around me, I would see
Mm.
these crabs crawling up the wall. And I'm like,
Mm.
man,
Mm.
humans could never ever crawl up a wall. Or I'd see
Yeah.
the whales and they'd be
Yeah.
connected in relationship with one another
Mm.
and just swimming gracefully through the water. I'm like,
Yeah.
humans can't do that.
Yeah.
And we often put ourselves above everything else, right, on the planet. That we are this super being.
Mm.
But then when you're out in
Yeah.
nature, what I
Yeah.
remember reflecting and my last day out there, I remember just looking and had this amazing connection with this one whale for about a half an hour where he just
Mm.
I call him Cool Hand Luke because he was just there in front of me with the fluke and just he
Wow.
was like he was
Yeah.
transmitting something to me. And it sounds
Yeah.
crazy, but these are the
Yeah.
things that happen.
Yeah.
And it was profound. And it was like,
Yeah.
don't don't be
Yeah.
afraid.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid.
Yeah.
Push yourself out there.
Yeah.
And I think that's about leadership, right? We have to have
Yeah.
courage to show up
Yeah.
differently,
Yeah.
to lead.
Yeah.
It calls on you to
Yeah.
break outside of boundaries and be brave and go in new
Yeah.
directions, especially
Yeah.
with the world that we
Yeah.
live in today.
Yeah.
And yeah, I really, and getting back to that story, what I really and I journaled about was that, yeah, we're humans we have our imagination, our genius. I think that's what allows us, that's our superpower. But there's
Mm.
all these other species
Yeah.
that have their superpower, and we're losing that diversity on the planet. And
Yeah.
our future really depends on that diversity.
Yeah.
And I think that nature teaches us
Yeah.
that we are interconnected and it's this reciprocal relationship
Yeah.
that we're equal
Mm.
among all these species. But
Yeah.
that's not the way we've acted on the planet.
Mm.
We've acted,
Mm.
from a profit maximization,
Yeah.
shareholder primacy standpoint. It's really
Mm.
um, pushed us to where we have this myth that we feel we're the most important thing on the planet, that we can exploit, we can extract,
Yeah.
not think about. We never really think about our impact on other creatures
Yeah.
when we are doing this
Yeah.
economic work.
Yeah.
And we're moving towards, I think, is um, the World Economic Forum in Davos there in January. Oxfam that collects a lot of data on inequality. They say that we're going to have our first trillionaire on the planet
Wow.
before the end of the decade, and that's shameful. I mean, that
Yeah.
there's such extreme wealth
Yeah, it is.
on the hands of loss of biodiversity, on the
Yeah.
hands of marginalization of many people on the
Yeah.
planet, which is,
Yeah.
I think, is creating a lot of this uh,
Yeah.
geopolitical tension on the planet as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
And again,
Yeah. Yeah.
I think a lot about this.
Yeah.
We talk about nature as something like going to the woods, going for a walk, but we
Yeah.
can find nature in our house. We can find it in urban
Yeah.
settings. Nature
Yeah.
is everywhere
Yeah.
because we are of nature.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah.
think that we can implement it. And
Yeah.
you're seeing a lot of stuff around biomimicry
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
thinking about regenerative ways of doing
Yeah.
business.
Yeah.
But nature is all around us, and we cannot just think that nature is going for walks, but it's
Yeah.
everywhere and it's in
Yeah.
us. And
Yeah.
I think it's just coming awake to that fact that
Yeah.
nature is everywhere.
Yeah. Uh, Kent, what are the practical implications of your research?
Well, I think it's really, and I think what really drives me is this is my purpose to really unleash human potential, uh, to be able to be to create the world anew. And I think that we face many challenges. So I guess the pragmatic
Yeah.
sides of this work is really to enable people to kind of find that authentic self, to be able to be more relational in their leadership style, to that can, you know, we know that we don't have a whole lot of time to really right
Mm.
this ship. The
Yeah.
scientific truth,
Yeah.
it's there, right? We hear
Yeah.
day in, day out that we have limited time left to really
Mm.
turn things around and act differently on the planet so that we can enable long-term well-being on the planet and prosperity. And if we don't uh,
Yeah.
move in this direction towards a more relational way of being, then we are not going to have a future. So I guess simply put, I think that it's really about enabling better futures that are really focus on the common good of all, not just humans, but all species on the planet. And that, yeah, I think that getting more connected to this idea of the relational turn, as I call it,
Yeah.
it's an opportunity for leaders to have developmental movement, what I
Mm.
call, and constructive developmental theory talks about this, get new self
Yeah.
knowledge, new self-identity, and new self-narrative of who you are as a leader that can enable you to be
Mm.
have the capacity and capability to
Mm.
embrace, not
Mm.
not fight climate change or fight biodiversity, but really
Mm.
embrace the
Yeah.
changing world that we're living in. And I
Yeah.
think that that's the important part is we need to quote Nora Bateson,
Yeah.
she says, we need to get into the rhythm of the change.
Yeah.
And I think that this work can opens up an opportunity to get into
Yeah.
the rhythm of the change and complexity of our world.
So, Ken, how optimistic are you of your work? Like, are you optimistic, or sometimes you feel discouraged?
Don't tell anybody, but I'm a pessimistic optimist. I hear the echo of Margaret Wheatley where
Yeah.
she talks on scientific complexity of it's really how painful change is coming. We can't
Yeah.
prevent change. Change
Yeah.
is on its way,
Okay.
and
Good.
nature, universe is much bigger than humans. We're just a grain,
Mm.
and really, it's up to us to decide how painful it's going to be. Change is painful.
Mm.
And for us to move in a kind of a regenerative way will be painful,
Mm.
but not making a move is going to be really, really painful.
Yeah.
And that's, I remember Wheatley saying about that. It really, the degree, it depends on the degree of pain that we want to have. Do we want it to be painful or do we want it to be really painful?
Mm.
So change, we can't avoid it. And it's, we see a lot of dystopian movies out there, Don't Look Up and many other, we read Cormac McCarthy's The Road. It's not so much a fiction anymore. It's getting more to be the reality. But I think that humans, again, I listen to my students and I
Mm.
recently did some research where
Mm.
um, we looked at what are pathways for sustainable development. And I hear the echo of interviewing students, and they're
Mm.
telling me that,
Mm.
yeah, a lot of them don't have hope for the future, but yet
Mm.
they do.
Mm. Okay.
Because they believe that the human spirit rises to challenges. And I think we
Yeah.
have to get away from the idea that technology is going to save us. And it's
Yeah.
really behavior change that we really have
Yeah.
to radically change. And that's what transformation, if you look at
Mm.
transformation, it means to disrupt. And I think we have to really radically disrupt the way we're showing up on the planet. And I think that I feel like even though I'm a pessimistic optimist, that I'll never get, and that's because, yeah, I am kind of pessimistic on the science and I don't see a lot of action. but
mm,
I'm optimistic for human behavior, and
mm, mm,
I'll never give up. I've got two young uh, girls, and I want to be hopeful for them and the students that I work with, and I see these amazing students that I have the honor and to work with. It's a real privilege to do the work that
mm,
we do.
mm,
And they give me hope because they
mm,
care about I see more care in them where they believe in values and
mm,
purpose. They want to do purposeful work. And I
mm,
think companies have to wake up to that. They will
mm,
have to wake up to that because millennials, Gen Zs, they're demanding this of companies.
mm,
And I think that there's a real responsibility, and I feel really strongly about this from business schools where I operate in, and is that we've really let students down, and we still are in that the dominant paradigm is still shareholder primacy, that we need to change that. And I see myself as a bit of an outlier, but that's
mm,
what I'm there. I'm there to disrupt and transform and challenge my students' thinking, to challenge my own thinking, to challenge faculty thinking, and also the community and the business community that we deal with too. And I do see, I know that we go to these conferences like where I met you at the Prime North America or
mm,
Grown In
mm,
recently. There are a lot of people thinking I'm not alone. That's where I feel
mm.
like, oh, great, there's my tribe, right? That there's
Yeah,
other people thinking this way.
yeah.
So I feel like there is some momentum there and some realization. It's just um, how can we find, as one of my colleagues said, we got to scale.
Mm,
We've got to speed up and scale. How do we speed up and scale? That's
mm,
the key thing.
yeah, yeah. You often use a phrase from historian Gerda Lerner's seminal work, The Creation of Patriarchy, where she says connecting to what it means to be human with your students is important. Tell me what this phrase means to you and how Gerda's Lerner's work inspired you.
Yeah, I think it's not only Gerda Lerner, I hear it from David Bohm, the Indian philosopher, Krishnamurti. This idea of what it means to be human is right. It's understanding our true nature, right? That we are in it together. We are one. It's this idea of oneness, right?
Yeah,
And you heard Martin Luther King speak about this. Carl Sagan, when he talked about the blue dot in cosmos,
yeah,
this idea of oneness. And
yeah.
it's realizing that we all live on this blue dot, the
Mm,
only blue dot that we have with the finite resources,
yeah.
that we share this together.
Mm,
And it's a one coming together as a oneness. And
yeah.
culture, again, limits, there's a lot of great things of culture, right?
Mm,
It's diversity. And I
mm,
think that we can still celebrate diversity. We need to celebrate diversity. And I love when my students come together and I have these diverse classes, people from all
mm,
over the world, because it's that opportunity to celebrate, but
yeah.
also to come together in dialogue.
Mm,
And this is another element that I teach my students is the true nature of dialogue, and
mm,
thinking about David Bohm. And
mm,
dialogue is this idea of coming together, that diversity,
mm,
and that's where leadership has to learn how to to enable dialogue,
yeah.
is that diversity comes together, and through that diversity we find shared meaning. But it's that oneness of what does it mean to be human. And what happens, as Bohm would say and Krishnamurti would say, that human thought is limiting.
Mm,
And with human thought being limiting, it it creates insecurity. And as
mm,
human beings, what do we do when we're insecure? Well, we find our
mm,
tribe, just like when we go to these meetings, right?
yeah.
We're in our tribe, right? Oh, we're together. Um, but on the downside of this, we
Yeah.
fragment from one another. And on a radical scale, what happens is we have war and conflict where we make people, we look at another cultural group as less than human, and we know what happens there. You just need to look at the history of humankind, of what we've done to one another, and it's really moving away from what it means to be human. And I love Gerda Lerner.
Mm,
Yeah, that she has a beautiful quote where it says, men have we've ruled the world,
mm,
but what will happen that day when we come together, men and women come
mm,
together to understand what it means to be human, right? That
mhm,
just think of the lost potential we have when we fragment, when
Yeah.
we don't come together and what it means to be human. It's just that lost potential in diversity that could be beautiful and celebrated.
Yeah.
But it's moving beyond. How do we move beyond the fragmentation that we create because we aim for security?
Yeah.
I don't know if that made any sense.
This is very nice. You believe in involving students in societal challenges like climate change through
Yeah.
applied action-oriented approaches, as opposed to those traditional theory-focused approaches. Why these action-oriented approaches is important?
Well, the literature points towards it. You look at Dewey and the
Yeah.
pragmatists, the School of Chicago, and
Yeah.
um, David Cope talks a lot about experiential learning, and just the more my own experience, experiential learning is the most powerful way to learn. That's how we learn best. And Paulo Freire, Bell Hooks, that they really have really helped me shape my own pedagogical approach. And this is this idea of education as a practice of freedom, where my job is, I tell my students, I'm not here to teach you. I'm here to hold a space. I'll hold the space, but as our voices come together, we're all learners coming together. And through the process of dialogue is how we learn best together. And that's what engages, right? And when you come into the university system and you're told, okay, the traditional way of lecture is you build your lecture and then you get up there and you give your lecture. And when I first started out, I'm like, I always hated that style myself when I was a student.
Yeah.
And when I tried doing it that way, it was boring for me and it was boring for the students.
Yeah.
But when you shift it, when you shift that model, when you engage the student voices in, man, it is beautiful, right? Because I'm learning from them and their lived experience, and they have a lot to give.
Yes.
And we learn together, and it's this dynamic because you have their voices involved, and they ask wonderful questions that really it'll challenge my thinking. And right, this idea, and this is what I tell them, the idea, the day of the expert, right? We live in a world, in this positivist world where we're told that there's expert knowledge. The experts will tell us, guide us in how to move. And we still see this used all the time, right? In radio interviews, we hear from this professor and that professor, this expert, which is great. It can give some guidance. Perhaps when someone's viewing this, they might pick up a thing or two, but really, we learn best, and that's what it shows us through experimentation when we, again, challenge kind of our mental models, through the dialogue of shared meaning. That's where we truly start to create something together. And I think in the world that we live in, right? And this is the other thing that I'm really learning is that this idea of possible futures, and Arturo Escobar talks a lot about this idea of possible futures. You could look that literature up, your audience could. And this idea, there's a group, Radnecki out of Oxford talks about desired futures, and Stockholm Resiliency Center. And really, it's about this perspective theorizing that kind of old models and present models that we use today in the world, they're not going to be effective as the world changes, as we rapidly changes with all the challenges. It's going to be imagination and values that really guide us in how we move forward. So I think that we need to engage students in the process, to create true dialogue, to allow transformational ways of thinking, because these old models that we have, they can inform us, but they're going to be ineffective at enabling us to get into the rhythm of change, to lead through the rhythm of change. It's going to take imagination, which is gained through coming together in dialogue, and values that are really going to guide us. And that's kind of this idea of perspective theorizing. It says imagination and values are the two most important thing, and as we start to think about regenerative futures.
So Ken, what is your advice to students who wish to further explore this topic?
I would say is if you're interested in this topic is reach out to if you see somebody like myself or you to reach out to us or anybody else that is um, if something they're hearing is resonating with them, just go down that rabbit hole. That is I think that's the most beautiful thing of when I do my graduate work.
Yeah.
And today I still do it is when I
Yeah.
read an article. If you read a academic article or a book, look at the references of if there's a thought that's referenced, look that reference up, start going down that rabbit hole.
Mm.
And the most important thing of all, David, is be present in the moment. I always
Yeah.
say that we live in a world where we are worrying about the future. What do I
Yes.
want to be?
Yeah.
Students think I hear my girls, one's 19, one's 17, they're thinking about their future. But
Mm.
what I tell them and I tell other students, and I think of my own self is just be present in the moment. And my mentor, John Milton would talk a lot about this as well, is that if you're present in the moment,
Mm-hmm.
and you let go of ego is present in
Yeah.
pain and pleasure, right? We tap into our ego, we all have it.
Yeah.
And what we often think about the past or the future, and a lot of fears come up.
Yeah.
But if we're present in the moment and just let things unfold,
Yeah.
and we get and we dive into that rabbit hole and we just listen to what's unfolding,
Yeah.
the pathway will open up for us. And you will go down that pathway and you will learn and you might stumble, you might fall, but don't be afraid to fail. It's part of the adventure. But if you stay true, being present in the moment, guided by your values, that's another thing that I tell students is really, really intimately explore what your values, what are your core values, and allow those to be your guideposts, your north pole, and really start to question and know thyself to understand what your purpose is. What is your why? It's not what you want to do, but why do you want to do it is really important.
Finally, what is next for you?
Just to continue doing this work is I love opportunity to talk on my doctoral work because I keep coming back to that. It keeps on. I actually just when I came back, I had about a month of conferencing, and I just thinking a lot about this regenerative futures. I'm really interested in that, and because a lot of my work, my research has been around sustainable development, but it even pushes me. I've been pushed lately to even think beyond that, and there's a lot of literature challenging just sustainable development, and I think I've gotten caught up in the cultural norm of sustainable development. But it says, I think as Sange said, do you want to just have a sustainable marriage or do you want to have a thriving marriage? And I think metaphorically, do we want to have a sustainable world or do we want to have a thriving world? And so I want to live in a thriving world. So, that's where my practice and my research is really going to be based on. I'll continue to explore this, to work with students, to work with community, to work with other faculty members to really explore this idea of how do we, what are seeds and scenarios? That's where I'm presently doing some work with a global network of what are seeds and scenarios for regenerative futures in teaching and just in practice. And I guess in a good equation that I keep reminding myself is to need to rethink, need to redesign, and need to react. And I think that if we all can do that, there is hope for the future. I mean, there's always hope for the future, and the future will unfold the way it's meant to be. But I hope it's meant to be, that human beings are going to flourish on the planet for a long time to come. And we're going to move through this very conflicting time. I mean, change will always be there. Just climate change has been there in the 4.55 billion years of the planet. And, we're continuing to go through climate change, which is humans, unfortunately, are the geological physical force that's moving that at a more rapid pace. But hopefully we can slow down our impact and yeah, get into the rhythm of the change in the planet.
Thank you so much for your time, Kent, and best wishes.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I always love these opportunities, and thank you for stimulating this dialogue.